thanks for visiting my channel. Today we're going to finish off my little Phalaenopsis mini-series on caring for orchids after they finish blooming. We'll be having a chat today about the growth cycle of phals and also how to get them to rebloom next season. Now, Phalaenopsis orchids naturally have two stages of growth. They have their vegetative phase and a flowering phase. The vegetative stage involves the development of new leaves and roots. Now, these structures are required for water and nutrient uptake and photosynthesis. So though both structures can perform both these tasks, roots are especially designed for water and nutrient uptake, and the leaves are far better at photosynthesis. So both a good root system and multiple strong leaves are required to keep the plant healthy. Over time, old leaves and roots eventually die off, but then the plant regenerates new vegetative structures. Now, phals are monopodial orchids. So this means they have a single stem from which the leaves, flowers, and roots emerge. You won't see phals with multiple growths like oncidiums because they don't have rhizomes, but they are capable of forming baby plants from various growth points, and these are known as keiki. Okay, so when we consider their growth cycle, it's easiest for me to start in summer. Phalaenopsis orchids grow most vigorously in warm weather, and usually summer's their prime growing season. Every year, the orchid will lose 1 to 3 leaves naturally. They'll yellow and fall, usually from the bottom of the plant, and then during their growth phase, new leaves will develop in an alternating fashion from the crown of the orchid. The oldest roots also over time will die off and new roots will form. Now moving to the next season. With autumn comes a drop in temperature, and this is your orchid's cue to initiate flower spikes. This flags the start of the flowering phase for the Phalaenopsis. And phals tend to develop spikes and buds through the cooler months, preparing to flower in late winter to early spring. These spikes can take anywhere between 2 to 3 months to develop, but then you'll be rewarded with flowers that last an extraordinarily long time, often up to 3 whole months. And even after this, they're capable of developing a second flush of blooms, either from the tip of the spike, or they can even create secondary spikes from nodes along the original flower spike. I have made a video on how to cut Phalaenopsis spikes after they lose their first set of blooms. So if you want to check it out, the link is in the description below. Now moving on, the natural cycle continues as the flowers fall in mid to late spring. And then the plant will again enter its vegetative growth phase for summer. Usually, the plants tend to concentrate on one task at a time, so that's either growing their core structures or flowering. However, these things can occur concurrently, especially in cultivation in our home environments. But because it does expend more energy when it's doing both, be sure to fertilize your orchids accordingly. So, even though we all want orchids constantly in flower, it really is very important to let your orchids go through a rest from flowering and allow them to develop their vegetative structures, because these are actually vital to the plant's health and development. Whilst flowers are only used for reproduction, and the plant can still survive quite healthily without them. But another good reason to ensure your plants go through its growth phase is that Phalaenopsis orchids need at least 3 leaves to flower normally. This is because they flower from the base of existing leaves, and usually this occurs on either the second or third leaf down on one side of the orchid. So if there is no second leaf on one side, it's really unlikely to flower. Okay, so now you've taken care of your orchid through summer and its growing season. It's got new leaves, new roots, and now it's time to get your plant to rebloom. So Phalaenopsis orchids can reliably be induced to start a flower spike by a drop in temperature, usually of about 5 degrees Celsius. Ideally, a drop to about 18 degrees Celsius for a few weeks should do the trick. Now, this isn't necessarily a drop in nighttime temperature. In fact, most studies show that it's just a general drop in temperature that's needed. So, if you live in a consistently warm climate, you can try putting your orchid in a room that's air conditioned during the day or something for a few weeks, and that should be sufficient. Or if you live in a really cold climate, if you keep your plant indoors where there's lots of internal heating through winter, try putting your orchid in a slightly cooler room that isn't heated for a few weeks. It should be fine as long as the temperatures don't drop below 10 degrees for a long period of time. And then once a spike develops, you're free to just return it to its usual conditions. Now, this is a really reliable method to get your complex hybrid phals to rebloom. And in fact, orchid nurseries all around the world exploit this natural trait by altering their greenhouse temperatures accordingly. And this is how they're able to sell blooming orchids all year round. So therefore, when you buy your orchid and bring it home, it might be a bit confused about which season it is. Over time, your orchid will adjust to your conditions and seasons and fall into its natural rhythm, and it'll reward you with flowers for many years to come. But during the first year, you might want to help bring it into season, and you can do this by trying to extend its flowering season if it's still a long wait until warmer weather, or if your plant is in really poor health, and maybe it's early summer, you might even consider cutting the flowering season short by cutting the flowering spike. Now, I get it. I completely understand that most people would probably cringe at the thought of cutting a flower spike with flowers on it, because that's why we buy the orchids. But if you put them in a vase, the flowers do last a surprisingly long time. But more importantly, you're giving your plant the chance to regain some of its essential structures like new leaves and healthy roots over summer. And then it'll soon be cool again. And then it will reward you with even better blooms the following flowering season. So that's what I would do. But, it's your orchid, and, you can choose to grow your plants however you want. So that's our little chat for today. Please subscribe if you found this video interesting at all. I do have 2 other Phalaenopsis care videos in this little series, and the links are down below if you'd like to check them out. So I'd like to thank you for joining me on this little orchid journey, and I will see you next time. Bye!